the first EU member state, to have moved its embassy to Jerusalem. So what we're seeing, besides the fact, I'm glad for this. Besides that fact, the closeness between Bibi and Orban is notable, and from my humble perspective, really troubling. With friends like that, you don't need many enemies. Ask the Finns, who are trying to get into the EU, and Orban is not a friend. Okay, so in any event, enough personal stuff. Hungary is moving to Jerusalem, which is great. Risa, I hate to ask you to do this. I'm not going to make it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I should just get it up front, and it'll ease after a while. On Saturday, I'm sorry. Saturday, we read Shabbat Zachor, the special Torah reading. Thank you. The special Torah reading for the Shabbat prior to Purim. I read the material through, just 2.5 verses, and said that I very much don't like the reading of that passage on a Shabbat as a sacred thing, because the notion of calling for genocide, even against a vicious enemy, didn't sit well with me. Then, in order to compound my problems with my friends, I mentioned the assault by Jewish settlers on the Palestinian village Huwara, Huwara. I called it a pogrom. And the last time an event like that occurred was Purim. It's all together, right? At the end of the Purim story in the Megillah, chapters 9-10, the Jews, because they could not reverse Ahasuerus's permission to Haman and his followers to attack the Jews went out and, according to the text, killed 75,000 people. That was a Jewish assault, government sanctioned, that resulted in 75,000 deaths. And I said that from the Purim occasion to Huwara, this is the first pogrom carried out by Jews. I was viciously attacked to such an extent that actually a couple of people called me up and said, "Stan, are you okay?" And because I like sympathy, I said, "No, I'm bleeding. It's awful, but I'm fine." Now, in the interim, by the way, the key charge against me, if I'm accurate, Howard, the key charge against me was that I have taken the word pogrom, which is used uniquely as a government-approved mass assault on Jewish civilians, and I flipped it to read Jews did it to Palestinians, and that is misappropriation and not appropriate. So several days later, the Sholem Hartman Institute published a mass podcast with Daniel Hartman, who's the head, Yossi Klein Halevi, who is one of the truly insightful Jewish political analysts, and Ilana Stein-Hain, another serious Hartman professor. And they said that what happened in Hawara was a pogrom. Wow. I don't mind being associated with Daniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi, but let us say it remains controversial. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, 18th century, one of the great rabbis, Hasidic, said, every person in Israel needs to erase the evil part that is concealed in one's heart, an evil part that is known as Amalek. What happens here is the feeling that there is an Amalek part in every human being, someone who attacks innocent people and slaughters them. Levi Yitzchak says, we've got to fight the Amalek inside of us. What the Hartman Institute and many others are saying is the Jews carried out a pogrom in Hawara. And said the following: Smotrich and Ben Gvir are exterminationist forces. That's a quote. Now, I'm not going to beat the issue. As I said on Saturday morning, I fully respect the negative reaction to using the word pogrom to refer to what Jews do. I fully respect it. I would be perfectly happy to say, forget naming. Forget giving it a name. A group of Orthodox Jewish settlers in revenge for the murder of two Israeli brothers attacked a Palestinian village and basically burned it to the ground with one Palestinian killed. For me, as I watched the video of that event, I could not help seeing the Orthodox settlers attacking the village stop their attack to put on tefillin as the buildings around them were burning. Okay? Let's not call it anything. But what we have experienced this week, in my eyes, and I'm going to let it go, in my eyes, was a horror, a nightmare. The word embarrassment doesn't even come close. I'm going to stop and I'm going to move on, but you're going to get the last word. If anyone wishes to speak, it's yours. Okay? Because I know this was controversial.
Rabbi,
I see Steve and I see then Harvey.
I just see, I think most of us are in agreement with you on concept. And I think the problem with the word, and it's not trivial, is throughout the English language, I'm finding it more and more difficult to express certain concepts because so much of our language has been watered down and diluted, and words don't mean what they mean, and you lose the ability for specificity. That I think it's, the concept is far more important, but I don't think the language is trivial.
I agree with everything you said. I agree. Anyone else have anything to say? If not, we will move on.
Merle is her hand up.
I'm sorry? Yes.
Merle.
I just don't feel like people really know what the words mean or meant and how they apply to now. So they criticize because they don't know, they don't know what's really going on and how it's affecting everyone.
Yeah, Merle, but that goes in both ways, right?
Oh, definitely.
Goes in both ways, and I agree with you. I as Steve was speaking, forgive me, I began thinking of certain obscenities which are now so frequent on various programs that they have lost all their power.
Yes.
The words have lost their power. They now become heck, the same power as heck. Okay, I see Brad, I see Howard.
Rabbi, I'm outdoors, so I'm afraid you may have difficulty hearing me. But I think your use of the word pogrom is perfectly appropriate. If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, that is an alternative definition of the word. Words have multiple meanings. Words change over time. That's the reality. So your use of the word pogrom to describe a government-sponsored act of terrorism against a group is perfectly correct English.
Thank you, and I agree with you too. How am I doing? I am agreeing with everybody. Howard.
Rabbi Davids, I certainly apologize for having attacked you personally. I certainly had no intention to do so.
Howard, I love you, man. And that, you know, I so admire the clarity and the commitment you have to a perspective, okay? And you never got personal. You just didn't. And come on, we're good. We're good. But thank you for that. And thank you, whatever. Okay?
So that's a relief. And I in terms of language, you said that first of all, you said a bunch of Orthodox Jews created a pogrom. I would say a bunch of Reform Jews supported Minister Farrakhan. It's ridiculous to me. Let me not use the word ridiculous. Just because these people could be called Orthodox Jews, some of my best friends are Orthodox Jews, and my whole family in Europe before they were killed were all Orthodox Jews. There must be some other name to use for these people, like extremist.
Okay,
ultra-national.
deeply religious.
I don't. They're not. It's not religion to burn down.
No, it
No.
was
A car,
it was the setup, Howard, that as the video was showing the burning buildings, I was listening to them put on tefillin and daven shachari. That to me was very unsettling.
So now Reform Jews are calling Orthodox Jews a name because they're Orthodox Jews. I think it'd be better to use more moderate language. And
I do call some people names, but none of the groups you've mentioned. If you push me, I'll tell you which people I do call names, but they're not in the Jewish community.
But the other thing was you said that a bunch of Orthodox Jews burned down a village. Now the New York Times says hundreds of cars and houses were burned. The Jerusalem Post says scores of cars and houses were burned. I don't believe the village was burned down. I don't believe that the settlers killed that guy. I don't know about the one who was killed, but I believe many of the cars that were burned, many of the fire, you saw a lot of it. There were houses that were burned down, but many of the cars that were burned down were in a junkyard. They had a automobile repair business, cars stacked up on top of each other, and they were burned. So I'm not apologizing for it. It's horrible, and it's very counterproductive to do stuff like this. It's gonna hurt us, but I don't believe they burned down the village. And why use extreme language?
Okay, I agree there too. Though I do enjoy using extreme language in certain narrowly restricted areas, none of which are directly related to Jews. Now, I want to tell you what I've been doing this week, in case you wonder whether all I had to do was to heal from what happened Saturday morning and kind of like relax. No, we have, something in River City. What is it? There's a problem.
Trouble.
There's trouble.
Okay. To set the scene, just so that we can feel happy, and you can wonder, what does Stanley Davids do during the week besides stir up a hornet's nest? Well, here's the issue. This is very funny. I am honorary president for life of the Israel Bonds National Rabbinic Cabinet. I think that's very lovely. When I was elected honorary president for life, I was dying of cancer. And they figured that this was a good month honoring this is really true. This is really true. And the problem for bonds is once they did it, they can't undo it. So I'm a problem. Okay. I was on the national campaign cabinet as well of Israel Bonds. And I have led many Israel Bonds delegations into Israel, into war zones. It's a very classy group when you do it at that level. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. My best occasion was I led an Israel Bonds group to Auschwitz. And Risa at the same time was leading what was it called?
March of the Living.
March of the Living group of high school students to Auschwitz. And by chance, my group and her group arrived at the same time. The only problem is I was staying in a 5-star hotel and she was staying in a youth hostel. Now I ask you, isn't that reasonable? Okay.
We love you. We love you.
That is one of those moments. In any event, Israel Bonds is an organization to which I am totally devoted. Paragraph. There is an event coming up this coming week in which Israel Bonds is hosting a major honoring of the most significant investors in Israel Bonds. Big dinner, you know the deal, right? Every year when this event occurs, the Minister of the Treasury of Israel is the keynote speaker. Why? Because you may not know this, but Israel Bonds is really an arm of the ministry, the Minister of the Treasury. We have to be very careful always not to violate any tax laws. And of course, they've been doing this since the 1950s. But it is a way of raising investment dollars for Israel through the Ministry of the Treasury. What does anyone care about that? I'm not going to be at the dinner, and it's on the East Coast. Good. Happy. No. The Minister of Finance, of the Treasury, is Smotrich in the new Israeli government. Smotrich and his twin, Ibn Gvir, called for the massacre of all the citizens of that Arab village. I have no problem saying, here comes the extremist language, Howard, he is a racist, a misogynist, a man filled with hate. And this man, who is on the do not invite list from most Jewish organizations in this country, and whom the United States administration, when they heard that he was coming, publicly declined to invite him to any meeting. So he's boycotted by the Biden administration, boycotted by most mainstream, not all, most mainstream Jewish organizations, and he will be the keynote speaker at a major Israel Bonds event. So he's coming to the States for that. The outrage from many sectors, not all, of the American Jewish community has been incredible. Public protests, public letters, a letter signed by 100 leading rabbis in America to the Israel Bond Organization. Don't do this to us. So eventually I had to get involved. I'm still living. I'm on the stationery. I'm involved in this. So I placed a call Tuesday to a national executive. And for 45 minutes, expressed my begging for Israel to indicate that Smotrich can't come because there's a family health issue or the cabinet is meeting, and find any reason to pull him out of the circumstance. I am proud to indicate that my articulate, thoughtful, impassioned presentation changed nothing. And he is due to arrive. He is due to arrive the end of this week. What Smotrich said, quote, "I think the village of Harawa needs to be wiped out. I think the state of Israel should do it." Bibi condemned him.
Oh,
Smotrich retracted with an apology. I see two hands because my presentation is over. We're going to see the finance minister of Israel. In the letter, it says, who has long expressed views that are abhorrent to the vast majority of American Jews, anti-Arab racism, virulent homophobia, to a full-throated embrace of Jewish supremacy. The Board of Deputies of British Jews a year ago heard that Smotrich was arriving before he became a minister and described him officially from the Board of Deputies: abominable views, hate-provoking ideology. And I love this because it's British. You got to hear this. We call on all members of the British Jewish community to show him the door. Is that good? I love it. To show him the door.
That's great.
Get back on the plane, Bezalel, and be remembered as a disgrace forever. That's the way the Brits do it. And I love it. Okay.
Hi, George. Straight away, I love it.
I see Harb, I see Steve, I see Zach.
Okay, why do we let this guy into the country here? Wouldn't it be better to give the Biden administration some cover by having some of the Jewish groups say, we don't want him here? That's my question.
They have, and the Biden administration decided not to spit in the Israeli government's face by doing that. I'm sorry, Harv, you asked. There was an answer.
I try again. This
Okay,
guy's horrible.
Steve.
My question actually was similar because I think they could label him a terrorist and keep him out. The question is, I'm not sure the Jewish community would actually benefit from that approach either.
I'm in a very agreeable mood, Steve, and I agree with you. That would be, it's poking the bear. That would be the United States administration directly interfering with a ministerial decision in Israel. Yes, it would be very difficult. Okay, I see Zach and then Brad.
Rabbi, I want to address your comments about Huwara. You focused really on the language, whether or not it was a pogrom or this or that. My question to you, sir, is what would the appropriate response, what should the response have been to that event? Are you with me?
Oh, yeah. By the way, Zach, every once in a while, I stop talking and think. It doesn't happen that often. Part of the problem, Zach, is that we're in this ping pong game of retribution. How do we start? The Palestinians start with an Israeli military raid into Jenin to take out a Hamas cell, which had already been involved in killing Jews. The Palestinians view the attack on the Hamas cell as an assault on Palestinian sovereignty, and it needed retribution. When I say ping pong, do you understand that Jenin, the two Israeli boys, the attack on the village, back and forth and back and forth. And by the way, we can go back before and find more reasons to volley back and forth. It is a horrible game of fatal ping pong. That's one. Number two, the Israeli standard response to a terrorist assault is highly controversial, but it exists nonetheless. The standard response is to go in and destroy the family home of the terrorist. That is Israeli government policy. And besides, if the terrorist is caught, then the terrorist is brought to justice. As part of the new administration, one of the bills that the new administration in Israel has posted is to allow the death sentence for convicted terrorists. You know that in Israel, the death sentence is only reserved for crimes against humanity. So the Israeli standard response would be find out who shot these kids, destroy their homes, and capture them and bring them to justice. That would be, like it or not, Zach, I mean, it's complicated, but that would have been the response. This group took the event in their own hands. Did I answer your question?
Well, yes and no. I was wondering, in other words, you pointed out the problem beautifully. In other words, you don't, there should be codes of conduct regarding this type of event. And
yes,
you've articulated the Israeli code of conduct, which is basically to go in there and, burn the house down.
the house of the family of the terrorist.
Right. So in your opinion, sir, is that an appropriate response for the killing of the two Israelis?
No. And I go back even to biblical quotes. The fathers have eaten bitter grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. I do not believe that that's an appropriate response. I would prefer that the ping pong of violence would be brought to an end, and that would be the best response.
And how do we accomplish, how can you recommend a more benign approach?
The more benign approach is to have the Israeli government go on record as saying, we endorse the two-state solution, and we are willing to sit down without precondition with Palestinians who will endorse the two-state solution and sit with us without preconditions.
I agree with that.
Well, Rabbi, if I understand your answer, you're saying that after the two Israeli boys were killed, we should have issued a statement similar to the one that you just said, but not do anything about it. Did I misunderstand you, sir?
Yeah, a little bit. You can't stop the approved method, the destroying of the house of family, until something can come up to replace it. And a peace process could come up to replace it. It doesn't exist. Today, if I were prime minister, God save me from that job. If I were prime minister, I would in fact authorize the destruction of the family homes of the terrorists and the bringing to trial of the terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I would acknowledge that what is called a cycle of violence has no end point. We must approach it differently. And if the Palestinians will not sit, there's not much we can do. If they will sit, then we've got to sit with them.
Understood.
Do you disagree, Zach?
No, I appreciate your addressing the question and stepping back and saying there's a bigger issue here. Until that bigger issue is addressed, it seems like we're just going to have that ping pong game that you were talking about.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes, it's like a stalemate. I remember seeing with Risa the new film of All Quiet on the Western Front, and to be reminded of how many millions died in a stalemated front in which no one gained any territory. I mean, we can't stay in that situation. Okay, I see Brad, I see Miss Jones.
Rabbi, I'm coming back to Smotrich and your comments there. And obviously his approach is abhorrent to me. But then I stand back and I say to myself, you know, I don't appreciate it when foreigners interfere in American politics. I'm not a citizen of Israel. You are. But where do I draw the line in terms of my expressing my opposition? You know, I'm perfectly comfortable in opposing American policy to Israel, but where do I draw the line then between, you know, expressing my frustration, opposition, and then sort of interfering in the internal politics of another country? Because I'm not an Israeli.
You're eligible to be one.
Under current conditions, I don't think I'm that interested.
Okay, I think that if Brad would become a citizen of another country, it would be ancient Athens. Wouldn't that be neat? Okay. There is no more important question that this group can address as the question that Brad asked.
Mm-hmm.
Over and over again in interfaith dialogue groups, the hardest thing for Christian and Muslim partners to understand is how Jews view their identity. We are not usual. And by that, I do not mean we are superior. We are not usual. What does that mean? We are not just a religious group. We are members of an international cultural community nation. We are held together by the same kinds of things that hold other nations together. Shared history, shared language, shared music, shared food, shared art, and an acknowledged homeland. When Rick Jacobs addressed the mass rally in Tel Aviv, I lose track, last week?
Last week.
He stood up and he answered that question, Brad. Israel has no reluctance to ask for the help of the diaspora. But when it comes to advice from the diaspora, they're deaf. Give us support and shut your mouths. And believe me, Rick Jacobs didn't say shut your mouths. He said it much nicer. That's what he said. I think every Jew in the world has a stake in what happens to Israel. Every Jew. We don't have a right, and this is acknowledged broadly. We don't have a right to advise Israel on military events. Nuke Iran. American Jews want Israel to nuke. No, we have no right to issue statements and provide advice for how Israel should conduct its military affairs. We don't live there. We have no right to tell Israel how to conduct its diplomatic relations. That belongs to the citizens of a sovereign state. But there are many things that Israel does that directly influences the Jewish community in Los Angeles. The simple example is Mihu Yehudi, who's a Jew. Right? I mean, that's a simple thing, right? When Israelis debate who is a Jew, they're debating us. And therefore we have an obligation to be involved. Don't tell me you're not a citizen and can't be involved. This involves us. And I would say, when the Israeli government sends as its representative to a national Jewish event in America and sends a racist, misogynist, hate-filled person, that will impact us. That will impact us. So we have something to say. Can we tell Israel, don't send the minister? No. We certainly have a right to say a fascist, homophobe, Jewish supremacist should be not representing Israel in this fashion.
Right on, Rabbi.
They may disagree. Brad, come back at me.
Well, I'm not smart enough, Rabbi, to know where the line is to be drawn.
Brad, you're plenty smart.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Wait 1 second. You're plenty smart. I'm going to go off topic for a second. As a past international chairman of the Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity, I was invited to a private briefing this week, 10 people, on the nature of what's going on with the fraternity in America and across the world. The news was almost all good news. We are doing really well. We've recouped the losses during the COVID period. We are opening up new places. Our largest chapter is Indiana, with 400 Jewish men affiliated with that particular chapter. After the executive gave the report, I, being myself, said, tell me, is there any trouble among the chapters in our demanding that they be Jewish? And the answer was, we have a real problem. We demand of the chapters that the members be Jewish. But now we are confronted with brothers who are challenging the operative definition of who is
a Jew?
Gewalt. I didn't expect that, but it's reasonable. Well, my father's Jewish, I'm Jewish. I've lived as a Jew all my life. So many definitions. And the chapters don't know how to apply them. End of that example, just to say that being Jewish is confusing. It is difficult because we are not like any other group, for better and for worse. Miss Jones.
How am I mic on? Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about how many women are involved with the government in Israel? How many women? Today is International Women's Day. Just a good question.
Okay, first of all, thank you for reminding me for what I had put on my notes and failed to mention. Thank you. This
You're
is
welcome.
International Women's Day, and I salute it, and I think it's great, and bad me for not reading my own minutes. So,
That's okay.
yes, this is National Women's Day. And secondly, there has been a report out that almost none of the second positions in any of the Israeli cabinet offices are held by women. That is to say, every cabinet minister appoints a chief executive, I don't have the proper language, to run that enterprise, which is the cabinet position. And in this government, there's been a dramatic reduction in women holding public position.
That's why you're having so much trouble.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Rebecca,
How does the American organization benefit by having Smotrich come here?
Money.
I'm not gonna be able to quantify. And I want to be careful when I use terms like ultra-Orthodox, because Steve is just waiting to jump on my back and claw at my head. But let's simply say that in the right and far right wings of American Jewry, he is not a bête noire.
What's that, Rabbi? Bedouin, what's,
How could it, give me a translation, a black
It means
beast,
black beast,
but it means
evil,
oh,
an
someone,
evil actor.
There
pardon?
it is. Evil actor.
I would say an evil actor.
An evil actor. Thank you. Okay. So there are those who are very pleased that Smotrich is in the position he's in. And remember, Smotrich did gain an impressive minority of votes in the Israeli election on his own. Okay, I'm looking for other hands. I want to move on. I see, Brad, are you back? Or are you just hanging around?
Well, Rabbi, I'm thinking again about this invitation. Was he first of all, did the organization invite him?
He
And
was delegated by the Israeli government because the Minister of Finance addresses that group.
okay, so in that instance, it seems to me that's perfectly appropriate if that's who they want to send. And our reaction is whether or not we want to attend or boycott the event. That seems to me maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but if that's their government's choice on what position to send and therefore what individual to send, it's not our place to challenge that decision, although we can choose
Not to go.
we can just choose not to come.
Well
Isn't
said.
that within without stepping into the middle of internal Israeli politics, a potential solution?
Well said.
Okay, I think that in the presence of evil, not to speak up is to condone. And
I agree.
And I think that Smotrich should be condemned, his appearance condemned, and also to know, speaking as an Israel Bonds aficionado, geez, I've used 3 languages, 4 today, that I fear with good reason that some support for Israel Bonds will be lost because of this decision. Because it's already been put out there that why would we want to be associated? You're right. You can protest, you can not show up, you can boycott. There is a game going on now in Israel with this massive protest movement all across the country. I'm proud of my people. That's a good thing in my eyes. Bibi knows he has to back down. If he steps on the promises he made to partners in his coalition, his government will fall. The protests in Israel. Okay, Zach, thank you. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you, sir. And I'm wiser and smarter because of your discussion.
I hope you'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
the mass protests happening in the United States are adding to the pressure on Bibi, and I think that's worthwhile. He's got to choose between promises he made to his coalition partners and what will allow him to maintain a relationship with the American Jewish community. So I think the protests in America are adding to his pressure, and that's a good thing.
Well, Rabbi, may I ask you a question?
No.
What can we do? What can we do about getting more women involved?
Oh, no,
Sorry.
Steve
Sorry.
first, because this-
Two quick questions, and you've touched on it, but as a practical matter, what proportion of Israel bonds money is raised from the right and the extremists, Orthodox, compared to more liberal Jews? And secondly, is not buying Israel bonds really the answer? That money goes for good purposes.
yes, it does.
You don't punish Smotrich, you punish people who need help by not buying bonds.
Okay, because we're out of time, overtime, let me answer quickly. Yes, I agree with you. Don't stop buying Israel bonds because of Smotrich. Do protest to the Israeli government and tell them you're pissed as hell that this kind of a human being is representing Israel, and continue the pressure that hopefully will lead to the shattering of this government. That's where I stand.
I agree.
What's the breakdown of the source of money in this country?
Okay, Steve, it's going to be an interesting answer, because now institutional purchases of Israel bonds have gone sky high. Many state treasuries buy significant amounts of Israel bonds.
4%'s been good these past few years.
And it's better than investing in,
Treasuries.
no, I was going to say something about crypto, but forget that.
I agree. Agree with you.
The liberal, let's just say, center and center left have been significant purchasers of Israel bonds.
Mhm.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing us to talk through this issue. We're not going to go back to it next time
We love you.
unless something awful happens.
Thank you for keeping us apprised.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all with love. Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Bye,
you.
Lisa. Bye,
Thank
Stanley.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a
Bye,
good week.
Susie. Yes, shalom. I will. Be safe.